Trees. We're on the home straight now for the Sunday morning. We've got an extra session which we'll sort of try and squeeze in before lunch. Lunch is at 12:30, so we'll sort of juggle it around then. Alan's come on Islam. The God hypothesis.
Thanks. It said that when the French astronomer Laplace was explaining his theory of the origin of the solar system to Napoleon, Napoleon asked, "Where does God come in?" To which Laplace famously replied, "There is no need for that hypothesis." And that's going to be the theme of my talk today. We don't need that hypothesis to explain how species evolved. But since we're all gathered together here and it's a Sunday morning, you won't mind if I read the lesson, which is in fact taken from the book of Genesis, beginning at verse 9. "And God said, Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, Let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit yielding tree after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the evening and the morning was the third day. And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may be above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters both brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning was the fifth day. And God said, Let the earth bring forth the living creatures after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. So here endeth the lesson. Now, people that know the Bible will have probably realised that I missed out the fourth day. That was to spare embarrassment to Christians, because what happened on the fourth day was that God created the sun and the moon. So how could there have been days before the sun existed? Anyway, that's the creation story, the creation myth, which some people take literally. Now there are two misunderstandings about Darwin. First, that he invented the idea of evolution, that he put forward a theory of the origin of life. When he did neither. In evolution, which is the idea that existing plants and animals have evolved from earlier forms, existed before Darwin. What Darwin did was to provide a convincing theory as to how the different species of plants and animals had come about. He said nothing about the origin of life, only that there must have been some original life form from which, how it might have come into being, from which all the others were eventually evolved. Darwin's theory was in fact that evolution came about through natural selection. In fact, the term Darwinian is more appropriately applied to the theory of natural selection than to the theory of evolution. Now, before him, some people, including in fact his own grandfather Erasmus Darwin, realised that existing species must have evolved from previously existing species. I mean, the study of the classification of life forms by Linnaeus in the 18th century into kingdoms, order, genera and species, based on the physical similarities between them, suggested that this might be the case. but earlier evolutionists could not offer a convincing explanation as to how this had come about. Perhaps the most famous pre-Darwin theory was that of another Frenchman, Lamarck, who argued that new species came about through characteristics acquired during lifetime being transmitted to the descendants of the theory of the inheritance of acquired characteristics. And thus, for instance, Lamarck supposed that giraffes evolved as a previous animal stretched its neck, and this was inherited by the next generation. The next generation stretched their neck, and so you came to the giraffe with a long neck. Now, this theory is not true, as can be seen, for instance, from the Jews. I mean, they've been circumcising their sons for thousands of years, but as far as I know, no Jew has ever been born without a foreskin. Actually, I mean, this theory doesn't have to be dismissed in such a laughable way, just because it was, at the time, a valid hypothesis. I mean, Engels, in the part played by Labour in the transition from ape to man, also has a Lamarckian view of how evolution took place. He says that when the diet of humans changes, it affects their blood, and that this changed their characters which were inherited. In the end, in fact, in the face of criticism, even Darwin himself was prepared to concede that there might have been a minor role for the inheritance of acquired characteristics in the evolution of species. In fact, there's a letter in the Bishopsgate Institute in London from the founder member of our party, Jack Fitzgerald, which was written in the 1920s, which shows that he was a bit of a Lamarckian when it came to the evolution of humans. Actually, Lamarck was on the right track about the evolution of giraffes. I mean, this did come about gradually, as he supposed, but not directly. I mean, giraffes evolved over generations as animals with longer necks, survived better by being able to eat leaves high up on trees. The same, in fact, can be said with regard to Jack Fitzgerald. Humans can inherit acquired characteristics, but not biologically, only culturally, through learning. Anyway, to return to Darwin. Now, farmers and pigeon fanciers had known long before him that they could create new forms of existing plants and animals by selective breeding. Darwin's argument was that the same process had happened in nature over a long period of time, and that this had resulted in the various life forms that did exist and had existed as evolved forms of the original life form. Now, a separate species, as opposed to a subspecies or race, which was all that the farmers and pigeon fanciers were creating, came into being when its members were not able to breed with the life form from which they'd evolved, or with other life forms which had arisen from it. And this is, if you like, in a nutshell, Darwin's theory of the origin of species. Now, Darwin didn't know any more than the farmers and pigeon fanciers how selection worked. He suspected that there must be some cause of the minute changes that nature worked upon, but couldn't explain what these were. The solution was left to later scientists who were following up research, which was in fact done about the same time as Darwin by an Austrian monk called Gregor Mendel, who was experimenting with sweet peas. Later theories came up with the view of the gene as a unit of inheritance, with the small changes being caused by inexact copies of genes being made in certain individuals. Now, the combination of Darwin's theory of natural selection and with gene theory is known as the modern synthesis, and is what is defended by present-day defenders of evolution such as Richard Dawkins and the other popular science writers. Now, the opponents of evolution, in all its forms, not just Darwin's, are sometimes known as creationists and sometimes as intelligent design, or ID. Creationism is a religious doctrine which denies that there has been evolution, basing this on the Bible, which is a sacred text not just for Christians but also for Islam and Judaism. In the opening chapter of the book, which was the lesson for today,